Mandy's digestive issues started with reflux, constipation and hard stools. After some issues with her digestion, her doctors suggested that she had her gallbladder out. She followed all their advice, but then her problems started to get much worse. Instead of constipation, she now had very bad diarrhoea and urgency, and she worked out that a low-fat and low-FODMAP diet was the only way that eating was manageable. But her food choices were so limited, she was underweight and she wanted to gain some weight. In this case study, listen to what Mandy did to calm down her digestion and start eating a better diet. Welcome to episode 93 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. This week I would like to introduce you to a former client of mine. I'm going to call her Mandy. She arrived to work with me over 3 months and she had a lot of erratic bowel movement. So some days she would be constipated, then she would go to having very loose stools. She had previously had her gallbladder out, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. She also really struggled with this incomplete evacuation sense that is so common in a lot of people I work with. So it's a common part of IBS that you go to the toilet, feel like you still need to go and it's not quite finished, but you can't get any more out. She also had very low appetite and just felt like her whole digestive system was not working. In terms of her diet, she avoided all foods that had any kind of fats in them, so no nuts, no avocado, certainly no fried food or cheese or anything like that, even yogurts. And she also avoided all things on the high FODMAP list, so there would be very little fruits and vegetables. It was very limited. She was in a bit of a state because she'd lost a lot of weight and she was now significantly underweight. I think her BMI was around 17. Normally the cutoff for a healthy weight is around 18.5 upwards. Now, of course, BMI is not an effective way to measure your weight, but it can give me an indication because I work with people remotely. When I take your weight and your height, I'm getting a sense of how big your body is because sometimes it is hard to judge on a screen. So whilst it's not a foolproof measure for setting weight targets, and particularly for people in larger bodies, because some of that can be muscle mass, but when we're looking at the lower end of the scale and someone who is in a smaller body, a kind of average height but in a very low weight, then it just helps to give me an indication really of the size. So let's talk now about what we did together. She was desperate to just calm down her digestion. She felt very nervous as well about everything that was going on, very worried every time she ate that something bad would be happening. When I did my initial consultation with her, I realised that she was feeling constipated some days because she wouldn't be able to get all the stool out. Then she would take some laxatives to get things moving. Then a day or two later, her stools may then go really loose. So then she would get really worried and she would take an anti-diarrhoea tablet. And so she was really alternating between both of these throughout the week. This was contributing to her problems, I thought, because she was overshooting on the laxatives and overshooting on the anti-diarrhoea medication. And so actually once she was able to remove the reliance on those, she found that she had a more normal bowel movement more regularly. When the stools were very loose, she was going 8 or 9 times in a day, and then sometimes when she was constipated, she would skip a day. So it was really irregular, and this was causing her a lot of worry because she didn't know if she could leave the house. Like, she was worried about going on long trips because she just didn't know what was going to be happening with her bowel movement. The stools themselves were also ranging from kind of orangey colour, about a third of the time were quite orangey. And then also sometimes if she had something like cheese or a bit of pastry or something, then she would get very loose stools the next day. If you remember, the episode that I did about bile was episode 91. In there, I talked about the role of bile and its role in emulsifying our fats. Now, for somebody who's had their gallbladder removed, they will still be producing bile, and bile will still drip out into the bile duct, into the small intestines. But what you won't get is a big release of bile when you eat something that contains fat. So you have a meal, and normally your gallbladder then ejects the bile into your small intestine so that you can properly use it as the food is coming in. For people without a gallbladder, that bile is just slowly dripping in through the day. Now, if she ate anything with fat in it, it would start to give her very loose stools and very orangey, kind of frothy stools. And that was potentially down to a lack of digestion of the fats. The other thing that I talked about in episode 1 was bile acid malabsorption. And if you have a problem with bile, then sometimes those bile salts go to the large intestine and don't get reabsorbed in the small intestine back to the liver. They will travel to the large intestine, and there they can irritate the gut. So we talked about a couple of things to help her with all of those different symptoms. She'd already tried one of the medication for bile acid malabsorption from her doctor, but found it made her quite constipated, so she hadn't got on well with it. Mandy had seen her doctor many times about her digestion. She'd had all kinds of checks, and her doctors had now diagnosed her with IBS and said that the problems she was getting were just down to IBS. There was no more investigations that they wanted to do, no more checks they wanted to run. They were happy that it was diet and lifestyle led. The first bit of advice that I gave her was about trying to stick to the restrictions that she was comfortable with, which was low fat, low FODMAP, but to try and increase her low FODMAP fibre. So we thought, let's work on this for 2 weeks, because not only will that give you a bit more variety in your food and trying to make things a little bit more interesting, because when you're on such a restricted diet, food can get quite boring. You're just eating the same stuff all the time. So to give her a bit more variety in flavours, and also just some vegetables, some different nutrients that she might have been missing. And then also to focus on increasing protein, and the purpose of that was to aid her weight gain. Now, I wanted to keep the protein recommendations lean rather than anything which could have fat in it to help her with the digestion. So things like fish, turkey, chicken, and to some extent eggs as well. They were going to be the most helpful foods. And then longer term, we were going to look at increasing fibre. It's such a balance of increasing fibre in order to help you tolerate higher fats. The reason is because people who do not digest fats very well will also need a bit more fibre. It just helps the gut work more effectively. It can regulate your stools, so providing the bulk forming fibre and also gel forming fibre to create a nice normal poo rather than alternating between constipated and being loose. Alongside the food changes, one of the things we worked quite a lot on was the nervous system in the gut. So what I mean by that is that she was feeling an urge to go to the toilet very, very frequently, and would sometimes go and nothing would happen, or she would feel like she needed to go all the time. Sometimes this can be down to irritation in your rectum. It can be down to internal hemorrhoids, creating that sense of something being in the rectum and still needing to go. Sometimes it's down to significant constipation and you just can't get the poo out. In this case, it might have been sometimes down to constipation, but also down to a kind of over hypervigilance. So she was constantly thinking about that area and constantly thinking about, oh, can I feel something there? Is there something there? So one of the things we worked on was ranking the urge to go every time and trying to work out how strong those urges were. Normally, if you need to go to the toilet, sometimes you get an urge to go, and then if you're busy, maybe you're on the phone or you're in the middle of doing something at work, you can actually postpone it for 15 minutes and then you go and you can actually go to the toilet. You can hold it in. What I asked her to do was keep a little a record every day at home and also out of the house as to how strong these urges were, and then if she did go to the toilet, what actually happened. Because what I wanted to help her do was to create more of a disconnect in a way between her gut and her brain, rather than thinking so much about the urge to go and whether it was real or not, is to try and tolerate some of that feeling, to try and almost desensitize yourself from some of those feelings. Now, of course, we don't want to ignore the urge to go. You will have heard me say that hundreds of times. It is good to go when you need to. But if you're someone who constantly feels the urge and is constantly going to the toilet, like maybe every hour, but nothing happens, then sometimes those urges aren't real urges to go and to pass a movement. As Mandy started to increase her food variety and volume, she did notice some changes. So sometimes she felt very full after eating. Sometimes she felt a little bit crampy, like little spasms were happening in her gut after food. We talked a bit about how to really focus on mindful eating, sitting down to eat, chewing her food really well. She was pretty good at this already, actually. But really just to focus on calm eating, foods that are well cooked so they're easy to digest and break down rather than raw salads and that kind of thing. Also to focus on foods that we knew were going to be low FODMAP to try and reduce any additional pressure on her digestive system. So the things she started with was a little bit of broccoli, some oats. Also, she introduced some yogurt as well, some low-fat, high-protein yogurt. And this went really well for her over time. I mentioned before that I was encouraging her to try and hold off from the laxative use where possible, and instead we talked about increasing some magnesium citrate powder. So she could start off with a very small amount of powder and just test, did that make any effect? So magnesium can work as a osmotic laxative, so it draws water into the bowel to soften it. It's quite good as a laxative, but also can have some calming effects on the nervous system. Where you're someone who is constantly overactive in your mind, you're a real worrier, this can be very helpful. Magnesium generally helps people sleep a bit better, so I suggest having this at night. Magnesium doesn't work for everybody, and if you're already on blood pressure medication, for example, or on any medication really, I should say, then please do check with the doctor whether it's suitable for you or not. But for some people, it can be very helpful. In terms of testing some small amounts of higher fat foods, we also worked on introducing eggs, a tiny bit of avocado, and also some seeds, some ground up seeds like flaxseed and chia, because these are very good for regulating your bowel movements. This was something she was very nervous about because she knew high fatty foods caused her to have diarrhoea. So we started with very small amounts of things like avocado, like just a quarter of an avocado or just a teaspoon of flax seeds, just to very gradually introduce a little bit of some healthy fats, because those polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats are so helpful for your skin health, for your mood. There's so many things that we need good fats in our diet for. We don't want to be completely low fat. Now, even people who have bile acid malabsorption can manage some level of fat. So you don't need to be completely fat-free. It's about a low-fat diet. Once Mandy had got through quite a few low FODMAP introductions of things, we also then started to work on higher FODMAP foods. So changing things like white bread to brown bread, introducing some other higher FODMAP foods, and this actually went much better than she thought it would be, particularly around fruit. Fruits was something she'd been quite worried about. She'd learnt that she could tolerate small amounts of them, and this was also helping to regulate her bowel movements. There was one FODMAP group that she didn't get on well with, so she just learnt to avoid those particular types of fruits, but there are other fruits that are in other FODMAP groups that she could eat more freely, and it was really good to get those in just for the added nutrients. So then when she had a bit more variety, we could focus on trying to maintain that variety. And there's a number of ways I do this with clients, either focusing on getting your 5 a day. That would be ideally 3 vegetables and 2 fruits per day, and a portion is around 80 grams. So you want to get 5 80-gram portions of fruits, or that's like a handful. So 1 banana, 1 apple, that's 1 portion. Or smaller fruit, it would be like 2 tangerines or 2 kiwis. That's 1 portion in terms of your 5 a day. So that's one way you can do it. Something else you might find easier is to focus on different coloured vegetables and fruits. So try to eat something from the rainbow. Sometimes I describe it like so: something green, something orange, something red, something yellow, and something purpley. Have you eaten every single different colour of the rainbow? And that's one way some people like to do it in terms of trying to get variety and trying to keep up different sorts of foods in your diet every day. Or the other way to do it is to think about 30 foods per week. So have you eaten 30 different types of plant fibres in a week? And I actually did a whole episode about this. That was episode 57, about should we be eating 30 different plants a week? So go and listen to that episode if you want a whole breakdown on the research behind gut diversity and why we should be eating it, or why we don't need to worry too much about the number 30. But the key thing here here is there's lots of different ways to motivate yourself, to target yourself, to increase your fibre variety if that is a target for you. It only really makes sense to do this though when you've removed a lot of the restrictive barriers in order to eat a bigger diet. So if you're someone who's only on a handful of foods, there's no point leaping from that to 30 different plants a week. However, it is a good target to try and get more variety and try and challenge yourself. Maybe there are some fruits and vegetables that you don't often eat. When's the last time you had aubergine or beetroot or okra? And what about fruits? Like, when do you ever eat papaya or watermelon or cherries? Some of these things come in and out of season, and that's another consideration for other people. But trying to think about how to expand out your diet when you've got to a place where your symptoms have reduced. And although with Mandy, she still obviously had a problem with fat digestion, and unfortunately that is the case for people who've had their gallbladder removed. It can still be very tough to tolerate high fatty meals. But by the end of the time working together, she had no more urgency, no more diarrhoea. She had weeks that went by without using her anti-diarrhoea medication or laxatives. And she was now starting to increase some small portions of higher FODMAP nuts and fat-containing foods such as avocados, or maybe even introducing a few cashews and almonds, so that she was really starting to push the variety and tolerate those without getting very bad symptoms. So she would still occasionally get flare-ups if she had too much cheese, for example, or she ate with friends and they were having maybe a fattier cut of ham or something. Then she may get symptoms the next day, but she kind of knew that's what her system would be like. She was able to eat a lot more foods which helped with eating with her partner and also eating out or eating with family. Her weight gain was pretty slow, and this is because it takes a long time to build fat and to build muscle. And so we talked as well about how to increase muscle mass alongside eating more energy. You want a bit more fat on your body when you are underweight, but you also need to make sure you've got enough muscle mass. So some of the things you can do would be maybe yoga, walking, any small amount of weights at home, because you do want to build up fat and muscle to increase your body size. What I find is sometimes people get into a slightly bigger body and can feel a little bit more resilient. It can be so scary when you feel like you're losing weight and just wasting away, and you don't want to be losing weight, but you can't stop it. So this is why I really suggest balancing the additional protein, which will help with muscle synthesis, so helps to build new muscle, even if you don't do any exercise. But when you do exercise and you eat higher protein, then your muscles have a chance to really grow and build, and that is going to create a really healthy body and a stronger body as we age. In terms of her weight gain in like absolutes, it was very small, like a couple of pounds. And that is because of the first few months of working together, she wasn't increasing the volume much, and she still struggled to have bigger meals. And gently over time, we talked about, just very small. Could you have one more bite per meal? And over time, it really did add up. But it's definitely a slow process to put on body weight. But I would say if this is you and you're also struggling to put on weight, do not give up. Keep going. Even if you can just manage one extra mouthful at each meal, over time that will add up and it will help you. So just keep going. I know it's hard when you feel full. It's hard to push on through. But if you can manage small amounts more each meal and just tolerate the sensations of being full, it will lead to weight gain over time if you are eating more than you're burning off. And obviously this was a difficult situation because when we normally say someone's underweight, you want to give them high energy density foods, which include high fat foods. And this was something that she just couldn't tolerate. So we had the restrictions in terms of she couldn't manage too much fibre, she couldn't manage too much fat, but she needed to increase her food volume. And then we had all these kind of different boundaries, I suppose, with which to work between. How are you going to increase your food volume and increase your calorie density without eating high fat foods? So it was tricky at some times, but I feel like she really came to a much better understanding of her digestion and a better understanding of the diet that worked best for her. You're you're struggling with any kind of IBS symptoms or SIBO, then please do get in touch. I work with people over 3 months and we can have a quick chat, first of all, to check that it's a good fit to work together, but I can support you from wherever you are in the world. So whether you're on a different continent to me, doesn't matter. We do everything over Zoom and online. I can help you find a better way of eating that suits you and your body in my 3-month gut reset. So please do get in touch. In the show notes, it's my email and also a link to book a call with me if you're interested to work with me. I'm going to leave it there for this week though. Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast. Better digestion for everyone.